This video looks at tide and current predictions, at the kinds that we have and at how we use them. I'll look first at standard predictions. These are the kind that we get with the tide and current pins in the trip planner and in floating trails and in any number of other apps and sites. Then I'll look at the Operational Forecast System, or OFS. Standard predictions can't respond to real-time events such as storm runoff. That's what the OFS exists to do. Let's start with standard tide and current predictions. Here's how they work. Suppose you live on a small bay and you'd like to make a tide and current app for your fishing spot. All you have to do is to measure the actual tides and currents for that spot over at least 2 weeks, and then relate your measurements via a bunch of math to the relationships of the Earth, Moon, and Sun, which drive the tides. Those astronomical relationships can be forecast far into the future, so once you make your app, it will stay accurate for as long as your bay's hydrology doesn't change. You may hear standard tide and current predictions referred to as Xtide predictions after the software that often generates them. And that's basically how NOAA made the tide and current forecast for San Francisco Bay. NOAA and the USGS measured the tides and currents at multiple spots on the bay. They've actually made those measurements more than once because the bay's bottom topography changes. They use a software program to do the math, and there we have our tide and current predictions. Now we can see why standard tide and current predictions are usually given just for specific locations, called tide and current stations. Those are where the measurements that underpin the predictions were made. Actually, that's true for the primary or reference stations in the trip planner. The subordinate stations are interpolated mathematically and have less accuracy. So how good are standard tide and current predictions? During the summer and fall, when river flow is similar to what it was when NOAA made its measurements, they're pretty good. For example, here's the page for 4 tide gauges around the bay, showing predicted versus actual tide levels in the fall. The match is pretty good. On the bay, the Achilles heel of standard predictions is that they can't respond to changes in river runoff due to storms and wet winters. For example, here are those same tide gauges during a wet spring. Strong runoff has pushed water levels substantially higher all over the bay. Strong runoff also changes currents throughout the bay in ways that matter a lot for us. And that's where the Operational Forecast System comes in. It factors in real-time data, including stream flow, to predict what will actually happen on the bay over the next 48 hours. We usually access the OFS current predictions through the Currents button on the trip planner. You can also explore the OFS website. It's a little opaque, but the homework links to a guide. So how reliable are the OFS current forecasts? The short answer is they're good for the big picture, and during times of strong runoff, they'll be much more accurate than the standard forecasts. However, they can be iffy on some details, and their resolution is limited. For instance, they miss some eddies that we know exist. Another way in which this visualization is useful is that it shows patterns you can't see from just the current stations. For instance, here's San Pablo Strait and Bay at the tag end of a flood. You see that these 2 big eddies have formed, so that along both points, the water's ebbing even while it's still flooding in the middle of the bay. This pattern is real and it matters for us, and you wouldn't see it from just the current stations. The apps Saildrone and TideTech provide the same kind of visualization, but using standard forecasts. Here's Saildrone. You have to select SF Currents in the Layers menu. The mobile version is subscription only. The browser version is still free, but only shows the central bay. The resolution isn't great. The sim omits some nearshore areas, and, for example, it doesn't know that the Brooks Island breakwater exists. Here's TideTech, which has better resolution but is harder to use. The free data consists of 5 days from May 2021. That may seem useless, but you can actually find a reasonable analog for most tide states, and I've used it that way quite a bit. Zooming in, we see that the sim knows about the Brooks Island breakwater and even about the main gap in Brooks Island. And that's it for tide and current predictions. Thanks for watching.